Good afternoon and welcome to this discussion proudly brought to you by the Old Mutual Women's Network OWN, as we are going to be unpacking the Marriages Act that was promulgated in May 2022 by the President Emmerson Mnangagwa. And before we get into our discussion, we are going to give you these words from the OWN President, Kudam Swaka.
Good afternoon and welcome to the Old Mutual Women's Network live chat. The Old Mutual Women's Network is a grouping of men and women employed by Old Mutual. Our purpose is to make a difference within the community and within Old Mutual. To date, we have successfully completed various initiatives across the country. These include provision of sanitary wear to girls and women, as well as the provision of basic commodities to vulnerable members of the community. Today, we bring you a panel discussion on the new Marriage Act, Chapter 515, which was made into law on the 27th of May, 2022. This is an opportunity for us all to engage and understand what it means to you, to me, to all of us. Thank you for joining us and enjoy the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kudamu Swaka. They're giving us a head start as we get into our discussion, as we unpack the Marriages Act. What does it entail? Why should we even be bothered or care about it? And to have this discussion, I have with me Abigail Machai, who is director of the Zimbabwe Women Lawyers Association, ZWLA. Abigail, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you and good afternoon.
And we're also joined by Advocate Authur Marara to give us a legal perspective around the issue we're going to be discussing. Authur, good afternoon and thank you very much for joining us.
Thanks so much, Linda. You're kind, eh?
And my name is Linda Muriro. Now, to begin with, Abigail, why should we care about the Marriages Act?
Thank you, Linda. It's important for us to discuss and to care about it because, firstly, it's important for everybody to know the law. Whenever new law comes into play, it's important that you understand what it implies and be able to make an informed decision. Your conduct is governed by law. And, you know, it's usually said your ignorance of the law is no defense. So you must know the law. Over and above the issue of being able to make an informed decision about your life, the Marriages Act in particular impacts on the social relations that we have. It defines for us what are marriages, who can engage, what is it that you can't do. So it gives us that range. It also gives us the rights and obligations for each individual as you get into a relationship or as you get into marriage. So again, emphasizing the importance of knowing. It has an impact on our inheritance, who is a surviving spouse. For you to determine who is a surviving spouse, who can inherit, you revert back to the Marriages Act, which defines, you know, who's married, how are you married, and what should happen upon your demise. And lastly, you also have the issues of property. We will get married, we are going to buy property, and we must have a sense of what happens should perhaps us fail to continue the relationship or anything happens. We must be able to know who has what right over what property. So these are some of the key issues that inform why we should know the law.
So I must hasten to say that the Old Mutual Women's Network has set the tone for a debate that is raging on social media. I think after OWN posted around issues around this debate, a lot of people, including influencers, politicians, have come on board running with this topic. So this is the reason why we are trying to then unpack what does it mean and why should we be bothered. And I'm going to be getting assistance from my co-host, the beautiful Masha. So if you have any questions around this discussion, the Marriage Act, please do come through on all the platforms and come through with your questions. And the legal minds here will be able to speak into those issues. Now, Abigail, we had already pieces of legislation that spoke about marriages. So what is it about the Marriages Act that we're talking about that is different from what we had before this in May?
Okay. So before May, we had marriages that were regulated under two pieces of legislation. We had the Marriages Act, chapter 511. Many people know it as former chapter 37. Chapter 37. We had regulation there. We also had the Customary Marriages Act, chapter 507, which was regulating marriages that are customary in nature. So by and large, these pieces of legislation would give you the scope and extent of the marriages under there. What has happened as of May is that we find that the new Marriages Act has consolidated or has brought together all those pieces of legislation into one. So tese taku gavenwa under one law. And if you were already married, for example, it does not mean that you are divorced because, we're under new law and the old law has been repealed, so your 37 is no longer valid. What it simply means is that we are now just being governed by the new law. And the new law has incorporated some aspects from the two pieces of legislation that were there before.
All right, and one of the things that the Marriages Act does, it decriminalizes willful transmission of HIV, and that's one area that a lot of people are not talking about. But Authur, what is the rationale behind this move, decriminalizing willful transmission of HIV? Because before this, kutaburira munhu utachiona we-HIV yanga iri mhosva. Asi mutemo uyu uri kutaura kuti haisisiri mhosva.
Yes.
What is the rationale, Authur?
So we actually need to emphasize the point that what is being decriminalized is willful and intentional transmission. Meaning, even if a person knows their status, that they're positive, and they infect you, that's not an offense. I think we need to understand that. So, whether it's good or not, I think is subject of debate. But there have been researches around the subject of stigma and discrimination. So the argument was, and I'm talking about what UNAIDS was saying, was actually welcomed the development. It was saying the fight against HIV/AIDS transmission was because of this barrier, where the moment you criminalize it, you're now stigmatizing and also penalizing the people who are living with HIV and AIDS. So in order for them to say, let's fight this virus, it was very important to actually say, no, let's not do that. But also looking at the developments in terms of technology, in terms of vaccines, you have now seen that things have now improved. Now we've got medication that can even improve. So the approach now is to actually treat it like any other viruses that any person can actually contract. But obviously there are various debates around the area, but the position is that particular provision in terms of the code is now being repealed, meaning there's no longer any such offense.
All right, so what is it, or what types of marriages are recognized under the Marriages Act, Abigail? We all know that Mjolo runs the world. So marriage under this new law that we're talking about.
Yeah. So there are three recognized forms of marriage. Firstly, we've got the civil marriage. The civil marriage essentially is a monogamous marriage between a man and a woman that are above the age of 18. So in other words, those people who already had Chapter 37, who were married, be it at the magistrate's court or who were married through a minister of religion, they remain having a civil marriage. So that's the first of the three that are recognized. We also have a customary marriage. And a customary marriage essentially is a marriage that is between a man and a woman, again above the age of 18, that gets married according to customary practices. That's the key underlying issue about customary marriages. And these marriages are potentially polygamous. So in other words, they can be many spouses within this marriage. Kudara, we used to know of Marika. Essentially, customary marriages are potentially polygamous. It's not mandatory, but it can be potentially polygamous. Then we've got the third marriage, which is a qualified civil marriage. This is the new aspect that has been introduced by this new law. And a qualified civil marriage is a marriage that is potentially polygamous, firstly, and it is constructed between a man and a woman that are above the age of 18. And it is a marriage that you cannot register as a civil marriage or as a customary marriage. And importantly, you are doing it according to religious practices. For example, if you're Islamic, you can contract this marriage according to your practices. So those are the three recognized forms of marriage. Somjolo is not recognized at this point in time.
And Abigail, there's a strong view that the Marriages Act undermines the marriage institution through promoting polygamy, particularly the customary marriage. What is your view on that assertion?
So in terms of polygamy, we've always had the law say that customary marriages are potentially polygamous. And so it's not a new issue that has been introduced by this law. It is something that we've always had. And remember, when you're getting married, you do have the option to say, do I want to contract a monogamous marriage? Do I want to contract a customary marriage? So it remains a decision that an individual makes. I think what has been the challenge mostly is that perhaps people are not as aware of what each marriage entails and therefore the law that regulates it. But polygamy has been something that has always been recognized before. And should you not want to be in a polygamous relationship, you can opt for a monogamous civil marriage, or you can also be in a customary marriage but not necessarily have a polygamous one. It's potential. But it's not law.
All right, so do keep your questions or contributions coming through, and my co-host Masha will be giving us some of those contributions as we try and break down the Marriages Act and understand what it entails, what does it mean, why should we care, why should we have sleepless nights because of the Marriages Act, and Authur, who stands to benefit more with these changes? Is it the man or the woman? Because it's not already WhatsApp groups, there are lots of conversations with who stands to benefit if there is any
benefit. I think it actually depends with the side of fence you are at. So I think that's a very fundamental question about, is it an attack on the marriage institution? It's not the law that attacks the marriage institution, it's the parties that attack their own marriages. And once you realize that you can actually be in a monogamous relationship and still go out and have another relationship, that's no longer the law, that's you. So for me, I really think what the Marriages Act does is to bring clarity on a number of issues. And if you go through the issues that it's addressing, for one of them we're going to talk about that, it's a response to the developments in society. You mentioned about Mujolo, the pandemic. It's a reality. Whether I like it or not, it's a reality. So one of the things that we find now is issues to do with bigamy for those who like Mujolo. Bigamy has now been removed. It's no longer an offense. Meaning even if you see your husband with another woman, they'll simply say we're in a civil partnership. So you can't even go and cause their arrest. Back then, some men were arrested. So those one will actually benefit. Then I also think women who were also in those relationships for a long time, were living as couples with their husbands. In a way, they also get to benefit. It was a number of times, they were actually being left in the plane, yet they'd actually contributed and so forth. So my answer is, everyone seems to benefit somehow. It depends with how you want to use the law to your benefit. Alternatively, if you want to manipulate the law.
And one of the issues that is bedeviling Zimbabwe, like most sub-Saharan African countries, is the scourge of child marriages. It's not just in Zimbabwe, but a lot of African countries, even beyond. Abigail, how does the new Marriages Act deal with child marriages?
Yes, and I think in terms of dealing with the scourge of child marriages, one of the positive attributes of this law is being able to put in place a minimum age of marriage. So Linda, before this law, our laws that were there, the Marriages Act, allowed for a girl that was below the age of 18 to get married. Our Customary Marriages Act did not state an age. So if someone was going to marry a minor, it was okay. The law was giving room for that. But the new law has said we don't want that situation. We must be able to deal with the scourge of child marriages. And what it has done is it has set the minimum age of marriage to 18. So you can no longer marry a young girl. You can no longer marry a young boy because it is now clearly defined in the law. It has also further gone ahead to give penalties and create criminal offenses. So if you marry, it's now an offense inotoendesa kujeri and unotosungwa. Similarly, if you are a parent who is involved in marrying off a young person, that is aggravatory. So it becomes a big issue that you actually can be arrested for and taken to jail for. So that is a positive stride that we find from the law in terms of dealing with child marriages.
All right, I would also like to recognize our live studio audience who are following attentively the discussion as we are having it. And we also will be taking questions from our live audience as well as from our online audience. Gladys, Abigail, one of the things that the Marriages Act does is to then also allow traditional leaders and heads of mission to also superintend over marriages. To what extent will they understand the legal provisions around the Marriages Act?
So, in terms of their understanding, I think like any law that comes into place, there will be support structures that are in place for you to be able to implement this. So already, for instance, when you look at ministers of religion who are already marriage officers, they would undergo some training for you to qualify as a marriage officer. So it is welcome that we've got our chiefs who are able to give us our customary marriages, solemnize them, get them registered, because part of the drive of the Act is to ensure that we've got registered marriages. There is a certificate where you are able to prove that you are actually married, to cure the problems that we're having in the past, where some people are alleging that they are married, but there's nothing to show that they are married. So it is welcome that our heads of embassies, as well as our traditional leaders, have been added to the list of marriage officers.
All right, so we have ministers of religion, magistrates, heads of embassies, and of course the chiefs, to be able to solemnize marriages. One of the trending issues is around I saw in one of the WhatsApp groups someone saying just be careful because can you really walk us through that? They say for a certain period of time. And I think for me, one of the keywords is a genuine. How do the courts of law determine genuine? What considerations will be made to say genuine? What are the issues around that? Can you please, I think both of you, can you walk us through?
I think it brings a fundamental discussion on the issue of civil partnerships. I'm going to allow it to open the conversation. But on marriage officers, the Act is very clear. Marriage officers are not allowed to charge. Many people, they don't know that. So right now, you want your pastor to come, they'll say, no, I want $200. It's actually an offense to charge people who are charities. So on a marriage officer, the law is even saying, I no receive a present for that particular service or even demand. Why? Because this is a public function. And I think that's one of the points people need to understand. Why is that provision? Because the law is saying we want to encourage more and more people to actually register their marriages. It has its advantages, as I think she has stated. Then I think let's open up on civil partnerships, then we'll come through.
So when we talk about civil partnerships, this is a new aspect that has been introduced by law. But all of us, I'm sure, can attest to knowing people that are staying together who are not married. So when we talk about civil partnerships, you are not married. You are people that are just staying together as husband and wife, but without legally being married. You are also people that are above the age of 18. You are also of opposite sex, so it's male and female. So Jane and Jane cannot be civil partners, or John and John cannot be civil partners. You have to be of opposite sex. And then you are staying together as a couple, living together on a genuine domestic basis. So the law is introducing what is called a genuine domestic basis. And I think before we actually get into what is a genuine domestic basis, it is important to say that A civil partnership is not a marriage. So if we go back to say, what are the recognized forms of marriage? There are those three. The civil marriage, the customary marriage, and the qualified civil marriage. The civil partnership is a relationship. It's not a marriage.
But iripo mu Marriages Act is haisi marriage.
Yeah. I think let me actually come through on that. So remember, there's something called an unregistered customary law union. It's not recognized as a marriage. So arrested customary law union, those are the Marora squad. The cows came home. Get what I'm saying? So when we post our Facebook, the cows came home. Of course, I want to post again. But gumira pa cows came home. The law says this thing is not a marriage. So Mruto private school because they're not married. I think she had actually listed the types of non-marriages. That's why one of the points that the Marriages Act is emphasizing is kana mama gato visrana mombe kudara. It's not this. And then kana ma after this new dispensation within 3 months go and register. But kana ma mchirumbo
Authur, what you're calling to register, kwenda kunochaya, kunopfeka veil.
Aiwana basa, veil is legal requirement.
Kwenda kukoti, kuita sei,
kwenda kwa chief. Remember, I asked about my marriage officers, the head of embassies,
yes,
ministers of religion, magistrates. So those are our marriage officers. But what determines where you go to solemnize your relationship marriage is the type of marriage. For example, kwa sabuku au unundo chata we monogamous. Customer no attendance at baba unoendachi vakadzi vakawanda. So you can go court, your nearby court, for example, you can actually go and have your marriage registered. You can ask your pastor to have your marriage registered. And by the way, you can actually do your registrations anyway. Mfundisi anovumidzwa kuchatisa anyway. Ukatoti panapa mona watochata ipo panapa. Panongodiwa ma witnesses too. Consent, which is one of the things that's very important. So it becomes very important to understand that distinction. Could munaruma unregistered customary law union? Civil partnership. Because unregistered customary law union when it comes to property. The law irukushanda kuma civil partnership ya Matrimonial Causes Act, which applies to people who are married.
Okay.
And remember, ku civil partnership akana na gonzora visco. Vanhu vangozana kuti I love you. Uvangozi true on a genuine domestic basis. So the contradiction arises in the sense that we have got a type of in courts marriage which has been known for ages, which has already given the courts problems, kudara, which remains unattended insofar as the proprietary rights of the parties to that arrangement are concerned. But the civil partnership are better because Kanataturambana, down section 7, section 8, section 9, section 10, section 11 is going to tell us how we're going to distribute the property. So that becomes something that is seriously inconsistent. Because I think instead of solving the problem, it's actually leaving a problem. Because remember, she'll tell you, the majority of Zimbabweans, they are in these unregistered customary law unions. The majority. So all those things. So majority so what happens now that remains a gap which I think still needs to be attended to.
You know what, Abigail, I'm trying to really come to terms with this whole explanation. I do know that during Paitkama debate, one of the elements that government sought to remove was the issue yekubvisana na pfuma. Madzisha akatsika madziro. Ndofunga vabereki vakawanda uko kwaita outcry yekuti nyaya yekubviswa pfuma madzisha akati aiwa ngazvirambe zviripo izvozvozvo. Saka tiri kuti isusu here pacustomary apa inokuregedza kuva semarriage tati muchivanhu chedu kana mari yaenda. How do we...
Okay. So I think as was highlighted by Authur that this law is trying to encourage everybody to register. So if you are married at the moment, pangobviswa pfuma, RORA has been paid, you are sitting in an unregistered union, which is not recognized as a marriage. And so the law is saying, if you are in that union, you must go and register that marriage so that it becomes a registered customary marriage, which is recognized. Saka, in other words, ibva kuti une wanano yako isiri kuzikanwa, isina kodzero dzayapuwa nemutemo, kuti uende kunove a registered customary marriage that is recognized, which enjoys a range of rights yausina kana uri an unregistered customary law union. And to those that are marrying today, you are given 3 months to actually register. So Jatara, to say that the cows just came home is no longer what should obtain. The cows must come home and then you go and register.
You said if you are marrying today, kovanga vakarorwa kare, vane ma 15 years vari mudzimba, vakangoendeserwa pfuma, vanhu vakapfeka majava, vane nguva yakaita sei kuti varegister, vari kupindawo here apa kana kuti zvakuaffecta vari kutanga izvinezvi.
Vanga vari married before, ndo vane 12 months. Kuti vaende kunoregister. Mutemo uyu uchapuwa an operational date. So for now, mutemo watanawo but hausati wa operational. There's a process that is going to happen where the president will gazette a notice that gives us the operational date. But it is something that we anticipate is going to be done soon. As we are aware that the process is underway. So as soon as date iroro rabuda kuti zvanzi nhasi mutemo wakushanda, if you marry today, you have 3 months for you to register that customary marriage. If you were already married, you have 12 months from that date that is going to be gazetted to go and register. And maybe before you go, Linda,
I'm just going to cut you short there as we take a commercial break. We continue with our discussion after this. Back. We continue the discussion as we unpack, break down the Marriages Act. And so I think even from our studio audience, pane issue irikubvunzwa yekunzi cows came home, mati kudiniko, tiri kutaura kuti isusu tanga tichishayina pa Instagram on the various platforms, the cows came home, ende zveshuwa dzakauya tikaunganirwa. And then here you are, Authur, Advocate Marara, saying kuti zvoni kana mangoti cows came home, asi musina kuno register, it's not enough.
True.
What are you saying?
So the first point is whether or not the cows should come home is determined by the type of marriage you're going to choose. So in the civil marriage, aisi yedu takada zvokuimport. Inonzi white wedding. Culture yedu haina white wedding. So that white wedding, remember, chinongodiwa in a white wedding, a civil marriage, is 2 consenting adults. Who says, Linda, interperirwa newe, I need you in my life. Then I love
to hear those words.
And Mfundis over there is actually present. Mfundis I'm charged, yes. But witnesses too now, we just need 2 witnesses. So in a civil marriage, lobola is not a legal requirement. So when I wonder, it's a hybrid of some sort which is not provided in law. So usually when I wonder, when it comes to so usually what we do hybrid way to know visa mari, which is now customary. So to cows came home, that is not a marriage. So kana wapedza cows came home, chienda kwa magistrate. Wondotora be wangu, I think ndiri ndega ndimukwanisi, anoti chat na wakawanda ndizvo. what's an African customary marriage, which allows the husband to have more than one spouse. But on Rwanda, because we don't have sufficient information as to the consequences, that's why we're in trouble, because trust me, an unregistered customary law union can as well in a headache, because you're not pleading your normal causes of action, because the law is saying at each. So vesana cows came home, gumira pachi, but cows came home. Chagae mari, ma RTGS, moenda ku court. Cherostorana gown. By the way, one of the things we need to stress is munano chata ne gown, ne veil. Ana umbosiana nenda kwa magistrate. Because the effect of that marriage is the same. Changosiana I venue, ne kutu wakufida ma strangers. Or family members. I get what I'm saying. But the legal effect is the same. So no chat as MG 511 oro. You can of course chat to the 507 and David. But usually people need to understand that it does actually help.
I just want to set the record straight there, Arthur. It's not like vana zvivindi zvekugara nevana vevanhu. Vanhu vanotya kuramirwa zvituna kana vana vevanhu vafa. Ndozvikuita kuti vaendese macows nemari.
Remember one massive partners. Chazoitaura zvedu. Massive partner are rimwe level rezvivindi. Where unotongodainzira kuti is my partner.
Please don't unleash the violence.
All right.
All right. So Abigail, you were then talking around nyaya yekuti registration manje kubva zvapinda mutemo. Pane vanofanira kuregister within 3 months, then vanga vakagara toti vabereki vedu nesuwo pamwewo vedu takabvisirwa tikashaina registration tane mwaka wakaita sei. What period do we have to register?
Okay. So once the operational date is gazetted by the president, pachataurwa kunzi mutemo wakushanda, those that are marrying for the first time with zvichivanhu or kuendesa kubvisa pfuma, you have 3 months from the date of that marriage to register. And if you were already in an existing unregistered customary law union, mombe dzakasobviswa muna 2000, hapana kumwe kwamakaenda kunonyoresa, you are given 12 months to go and register that marriage. And one might ask to say, zvine basa rei?
Yes.
So even if I don't register, so what? It is important to understand that if you remain in an unregistered customary law union, number one, that is not a marriage. Saka zvinhu zvatinchitaura kumaraini kuti ndakaroorwa, but it is not a recognized marriage. The second aspect is that if you remain there, you have less rights because chunchako ichi is not a marriage. So you don't have the protection that is given to other people that are already married. You have limited protection. There are specific aspects that the law says, okay, you can be protected in regards to inheritance, you can be protected in regards to guardianship. Zvotopera ipapo. So, for example, people that are married under unregistered customary law unions then decide, toramba takadero. Then the marriage goes bust, and you have to part ways. The person that is in a recognized marriage has a law that they can use that is favorable for them to share their property. Inonzi Matrimonial Causes Act. This law says, okay, ngatidamburei property yedu yatakatenga tese, uyu ngaawane izvi, uyu ngaawane izvi, zvichienderana nemagariro ataita. But if you are in an unregistered union, you cannot even use that law because you are not a marriage.
But then again, Abigail, we are saying that vanenge vachichaya mapoto vai mutemo wakuti zvoni kana vakusiyana kana tadhitemaina kuti zveshuwa it was a genuine arrangement zveshuwa vanokwanisa kupatsanurana midziyo and then tochidzoka futi toti if you are unregistered the law can't protect you because you are not recognized. Ini ndiri kuenda kuchechi ndiri kutonzi mai Marara ndakapfeka bhachi ndatopfekedzwa bhachi ndichinzi mai Marara because ende munharaunda vanhu vari kutonditi mai Ningi. I mean, I'm recognized by the society as mai Ningi.
Can I come through on that?
Yes.
So I think this is one point which you need to understand. Once your marriage is registered and is recognized, there is a regime that applies in terms of whether you are married in community or out of community or property. So the obvious advantage is if your marriage is recognized by virtue of the Married Persons Property Act, your marriage is deemed to be out of community of property. Meaning zvandakatenga inini ndezvako. Zvawakatenga iwewe ndezvako. But kana tauma registered customary law unions, languages dzana out of community hadzitaurwi, because haisi marriage. Maofana kutaura chirungu chinana unjust enrichment. Chirungu chinana tacit universal partnership. Where someone can say, Takata create a partnership. Inini contribution yangu was indirect. Ana anasendra kaisa. Anango that inini ndaimira newe, ndaikusimbisa. I was providing motivation, inspiration. And that type of contribution is recognized, by the way. So if you're not careful, you can actually end up losing. Because the basis is for us to arrive at a result where we're going to do distribution of property. But you know, to quote e-distribution. But yeah, distribution, that is where there is the majority of the headaches. So the advantage of registering is there is now, and there has always been, systems in terms of statutes that specifically deals with what happens on divorce.
Is this making sense? If it's not making sense, send through the questions as they try and make us understand what the Marriages Act entails and how it affects our day-to-day living. I'm doing this with my co-host, Masha, and she will send through the questions that you have. So do send through your questions as we try and unpack the Marriages Act. I'm joined by Abigail Machai, who is director of ZWLA, as well as Authur Marara. Now, pa civil partnerships, I'm correct, right? Parupunzi shoni standard genuine domestic basis. How genuine is genuine? Because you know, there's a phrase, gold digger, advocate. 2 days, Saka, how do they determine that this was indeed a genuine civil partnership?
Okay. So the law does put a standard or a yardstick to come up with the genuineness of the relationship. Remember, we said this is not a marriage, but takurambana, isutantisina kurorana or tanchigarisana, and we want to see how to distribute our property. So the court will determine, were you staying together genuinely? And to do that, they look at a range of issues. One of the issues they look at is the duration that you have stayed together, the duration of the relationship. Per duration, a lot of people are saying, maybe magaramese 2 days, maybe magaramese 5 days. Apana kutaurwa kunzi mune magaramese for how long? Pari kungonzi ticha consider kuti makagaramese for how long? Clearly, on a case-by-case basis, vagara vese for 2 days, vakasiyana nevanhu vagara vese for 10 years. The level of contribution and engagement within that relationship is obviously different. But per duration, it is important to know that apana kuiswa limit, apana kudefinwa kunzi mukagara mese 5 years ndo zva genuine, mukagara mese 1 day hazvizi genuine. Pangonzi, the court will consider the duration of the relationship. They will also consider whether you were having sexual relations within that relationship. They are going to be getting evidence, I suppose, kuti tanga tichi sangana tese, tichionana zvakadii, and zvanga zviri sei, but they will consider the issue around the sexual relations. They will also consider financial dependency. How were we distributing our resources? Were you, sending me to Dubai for the holiday?
Bali.
Were you giving me a motor vehicle? Were you paying for rentals? Things like that. Our financial relations together. Zvanga zvakamira sei. So again, everybody is coming with evidence. Uyanga chisa mariso inindi chizodai. I was dependent on him or her. Because remember, civil partnerships, men or women can have civil partnerships. So they will also consider the finances. If in that relationship you had children, they will also consider that. To say, yes, this could be a sign that you had a genuine relationship. You had children together. They will consider what they term the reputation and public aspects of the relationship. On what is zikanwa here? Nana tete, mamchibuda mese here, you know, vanozera kuti avandi vamarara avando mai marara vacho zvanga zvichifamba sei. So they will also consider.
Authur, we have thousands of people watching. Please.
And there's also a point, I think, Abigail, which is very important, is there is one of the considerations is a commitment to a shared life. Yes. So how committed were you to actually sharing life? And by the way, it's also very important, talking about civil partnerships, that it can actually coexist with a civil marriage.
I was then going to ask that. My unions but maybe just before that. So this means that determination on how the genuineness will be determined on a case by case. 1 year, but by 1 year maybe ana umbo kana kuti unonyatsotsigira genuineness. Mwakagara 6 months vachichaya mapoto ane zvinogona kutsigira zvakawanda. Ndizvo zvatiri kutaura ndizvo.
Yeah, but also now, from the factors that she's listed, it's now very easy to be in a civil partnership. Why? Because if it's a man, usually I believe it's someone one, I don't rent an apartment. Next, I don't put for any coco. Already, I don't take a box for a sexual relationship. Next, talking about to rent a flat, I don't take a box, redependence. Thirdly, can I stop music on my line? Tatwane repetition. Chibaba, you know those things. So now it's very, very easy to be in a civil partnership. So so as you see, it's actually costly to live a civil partnership. We're talking about that later.
All right, Sarai, so we don't want to just be talking amongst the three of us. We would like to hear what questions are coming through as we try and break down the Marriages Act. And my beautiful co-host, Marsha, is going to lead us through some of the questions that are coming through.
Thank you very much for such insights. As a single lady, I'm already wondering, do I really need to enter into one of these marriage unions? But anyway, I'll go to the questions that have been directed directly to Authur Marara by some of the listeners on the virtual platform.
Okay.
One of the questions is, Authur, is it possible for me and my partner to sign a document that specifies how we want our marriage to run?
All right. So that has always been there. So before you get married, you're going to do a prenuptial agreement where you say, this is how we want our affairs to be governed. A number of people who have actually managed to build wealth, they usually do that because they also want to protect what they've worked for. I think you know a number of people who became billionaires on divorce. So usually it becomes very important before you get married, especially the height of love, to say, sweetheart, babe, before you settle down, life happens. So you might actually want to specify what needs to happen. So you can do that with a prenup. With the civil partnership, many of these things, the mutual arrangements, I'm not saying whatever, but very soon we might be seeing some mutual agreements where people need to be very clear, what are we doing exactly? Are we going into a civil partnership or just doing what? Njolo. So it becomes very important. So right now, that dispensation is coming very soon once this thing has been operationalized. Because literally, just to discuss now, because when I go just around because of my civil partnerships, and my consequences are required today. So my answer, yes, it's possible to actually have a document that regulates your proprietary issues.
Thank you very much for that confirmation, Authur. The second question that was asked directly to you.
Again?
Yes, to you directly. The question says, Authur, do you mean we can no longer sue for adultery damages for some of us married under Chapter 5.11?
All right. So that's a very important question as well. And I think the position that we're having now is the direction that we're taking. the direction that we're taking is pointing us towards a future where you won't be able to sue for adultery. Why? Because remember, a civil marriage is monogamous in nature. And the definition of a civil marriage is one that is monogamous, and it means to the exclusion of another person, meaning no other person is allowed close to your relationship. But the moment we begin to recognize that there's someone called a civil partner, and that person is also protected in law because their rights, legal obligations, they're even recognized and they're even extended to the Matrimonial Causes Act. That shows that the attitude towards the marriage institution is really shifting. So currently, as we speak, you can sue for adultery. But the question is our bench going to allow that cause of action to continue? Our neighbor in South Africa, you can't sue for adultery. So cannot also go up mama and ababari bees. What was the excuse? Because the argument is this thing is a contract. So you don't sue a third party for a breach. You sue the other party to the contract. That's actually the argument. So many countries globally, they've actually outlawed that cause of action. But I'm suspecting highly with this pace at which we're moving that soon we won't be able to sue for adultery.
Oh, thank you very much. I'm sure we are all getting educated right here of our rights, some of them which are going to be stripped away anyways. And then moving forward, one other interesting question that also came through our virtual platform is, if the husband steals family resources and buys a house for the civil partner, how does the law treat that? For example, if I can...
Let's ask Abigail to respond to that one. She's been too quiet.
True.
Yes, Abigail. What happens?
Yes, so in terms of the property that has been acquired within the civil partnership, the law provides that you are able to share that property. And that property is shared in accordance with the Matrimonial Causes Act. So in other words, the parties are going to come together and show how they acquired this property. And it's important to know that whenever we talk about sharing of property under the matrimonial causes, it's not just about the monetary contribution or the direct contribution. It's a range of things that include indirect contribution. So just care and support. Those are things that are considered. So yes, people will be able to share anything that they acquired, even within a civil partnership.
I think just to add, the question that you're also highlighting is Baba, Mari, Yanagashana Ininem, Kunotengera Kaama 2000, who is now in court, the civil partner, is it? What happens now to that particular property? And I think the considerations that we're mentioning are very important. I think that's the question. Sadly so, the sweat route one in main house. Sadly, you don't enjoy a different address. What else come on to any bins? You have some of your thing. What else come on any sofa? A Blake, so the question is, what do you do? I think, did I phrase it quite correctly? Yeah, you can do it, Timozo.
So, I think we still share the property. There are a number of things that will be considered that include how we acquired. One of the things that we are all waiting to see how the court is going to respond is kuti tichauya here ku court tab 3. My guru, the husband, and the civil partner, because we all have a vested interest in this house. So how exactly are we going to be resolving that? And I think that is something that court will determine. But to say, can we share? Yes, we can share. Because the civil partner might not be the one who is saying, Maria Kabiwa, kuna my guru. Civil partner ngoziva kuti, my husband or my boyfriend came and bought me this property. And we have been living together, and I'm financially dependent on him. We have been having sexual relations, tagaratese maybe 2-3 months or whatever period. So the civil partner is proving the genuineness of the relationship. The husband is saying, I purchased the property. How did I do that? Depending on, the evidence that he himself is going to produce. The main house has a vested interest because she would be wanting to come to court and say, actually, Mari yakatobiwa kumba. And have to show kuti yakabiwa sei, yaive Mari ipi, and then how did we get there? So essentially, we are going to be sharing the property. The law tries to draw distinction between property yeku main house ne property yevanhu vari mu civil partnership. And civil partnership, it's also important to note that it's not just a small house. It can be people vakugara vese vasingorina kuchata. So it's not always that it is coexisting with a civil marriage. But in the event that it is coexisting, the law tries to draw distinction to say, zvevanhu vanga vakachata ku civil marriage, this is your property. And when the civil partnership is ending, they are only supposed to share what they themselves had. So they are not supposed to go over to the property of the main house. That is what the law says on paper. But practically, it is very difficult perhaps to really put it in boxes. Kuti imota their main house or their civil partnership. Because you will find that there are examples where that same car is floating between these different houses unknown to the women, or but babanomboitora womboitorerwa yombonopuwa the civil partner. So it's not as clear cut as the law perhaps is saying that we should just have our properties in boxes. There will obviously be intermingling of things. Another good example, property that is owned in the husband's name, where the main house can be residing kufam varikurima, and the civil partner can be residing in this matrimonial home. So everybody is able to show that I was staying here, I have financial dependence, takatenga say, and things like that. So it's not always clear cut that, though the law does try to give provision to that.
Yeah, maybe just to add on to that, a number of people practically, even when we're married, usually we don't buy with an intention to divorce. So they want to So practically, like what Abigail has been saying, it becomes very difficult. Those who distinguish what but we also need to understand something. When I love, you're to a civil partner. What a civil partner imba, you know, Mr. Marke. That property by law, ownership you have to transfer. So and get out of my house, Chichi. You will not want to get out of your house. So people also need to understand those things. Hey, take a ring, also no give. So usually what was happening is then before I was civil partner. Once not zingiri, once Buddha, Chichi, those things. Now, ne arrangement kutomzinga kwa kutonetsa. Both vachomvisa amba akuendera court ne matrimonial cause act. Kuti ninda dependent on you. Maintenance yakuya. So no problem with baba roto and namari ndrumbochingira chi civil partner. Yeah, those things.
Any more questions, Marcia?
Interesting. Maybe as a follow-up, I can then just ask this other question that also came through. Does the civil partnership have a superior right over, or does it override the Property Right Act? That's just how it has been asked.
All right. So let's clarify something. The people who are in a civil marriage, for example, they've got their rights defined in terms of the Married Persons Property Act, which says it's out of community of property. A civil partnership is not a marriage. That's very important. So you can't talk about in community or out of community of property. Meaning, your recourse now is to say, what does the Matrimonial Causes Act say? And some of the things to be looked at now is actually, how did you acquire the property? Was it a civil partnership or it was a sleepover? So, kind of what was the civil partnership? I used to sleep over my 2 minutes. There was no, I'm a civil partner. I used to come every Friday. No. I saw because the idea is you guys were actually living as technically as husband and wife. So the idea now is to create that image. Then we now apply a particular formula to that. So in terms of superiority of rights, I don't think so. But I really think in a way it's actually very invasive, in the sense that the party who is married to the guy who is in a civil partnership, they actually have to prove to the satisfaction of the court that property ndiyangu zvemashwashwa. So like what Abigail was saying, now we end up having the main house and other in court. Because there is no way you can defend your rights in your absence. So the law very soon, I think we'll look forward to seeing it being tested and see how the court is going to deal with that. But I really think it's interesting times ahead.
Iyabvunzwa nagogoi ndinongoibvunza yakadero. Hanzi pane cut off age here yevanhu vanga vakaroorana kudhara yekuti tichimhanyidzana tichienda kuma-chiefs tichinochitanga kuregister ma-marriages edu nekuti ma-witnesses akafa kare.
All right. Maybe I could answer that, but there's no cut off age. The requirement is you have to be alive. Then you just need to, customary, the requirement is comply with the formalities, which are known as customary law. If you want to make it registered, remember, you just need 2 witnesses. So there's no cut off age. In fact, you're actually encouraged to register your marriage.
Arthur, ma-witnesses edu akatofawo kare. Tave in our 90s, mwari vatichengeta.
So remember the point.
In other words, vari kudawo an exemption gogo yokuti vanoregister marriage yavo.
Remember, you don't have a marriage. So the witnesses are now witnessing your marriage. Are you getting the point? So it means it doesn't matter. Right now, you just need 2 witnesses who are adults to come through and say, these are the people, they are now solemnizing, they're now registering their marriage.
Thank you very much. Maybe just the last one for now. Can I register the customary marriage without lobola being paid?
No, you can't.
You can't register a customary marriage without lobola being paid, because anything that is customary in nature, you have to pay lobola. So lobola becomes a prerequisite. So part of the questions, for example, that are asked by the marriage officer when you go and register is to say, was the marriage consideration or lobola paid? So you do need to get that paid. The only marriage that you don't require lobola is the civil marriage.
Thank you very much. I think that should be it for now, unless the people we have in this room right now have questions to ask.
I have a lot of questions, but
he was literally writing.
We'll take maybe 2 from you for now. Yes.
Okay, no problem. My first question is, can I change between these marriage acts? Let's say that the first was civil, then I just realized that, you know what, I think customary is for me.
Yes.
Can I do that?
All right.
You can change between the different types of marriages. You can change from a customary marriage to say, I want to get into a civil marriage. You are able to do that. If you have a civil marriage and have realized, maybe monogamy irikunetsa, and I want to get into a potentially polygamous, it means you divorcing, ending that first marriage, because the civil marriage is terminated by death or divorce. So you have to divorce and then opt for the marriage that you want. But if you're coming from a customary marriage, you can get a civil marriage. What you can't do is to have the 2 concurrently. You cannot be in a civil marriage and be in a customary marriage.
Yeah. So you have to choose.
Okay, thank you very much. My second question is, I think that there is a bit of imbalance or unbalance, because we are looking at more females when we're talking about civil partnerships. Let's just say I'm a young man and I'm in a civil partnership with a married woman, can I actually go and actually contest or be protected by this law? Because we've seen many viral videos of the husband coming to the young boy, beating him up in his property, and why are you texting my wife and this? So can you please clarify and address that certain part as well for the male?
I think let me come through. So when you are talking about civil partnership, remember the requirement. The requirement is just there has to be a man and there has to be a woman. And secondly, there is no limit to the number of civil partnerships you can have. So it's now depending with your energy levels and your ability to sustain them. So if you're a man, you can actually be part of a civil partnership, and you can also now raise all these arguments. Also, you're claiming maintenance from your civil partner who is a woman. So yeah, it's real. It's possible. You can actually be a civil partner. But obviously, I wouldn't recommend that. But it happens.
All right, so we'll allow others to ask as well.
Okay. Mfunzo wangu uri pakuti ukaona mukadzi, in fact ndo maonero andiri kuzviita, ukaona mukadzi akuti wape lobola akuti let's go and legalize zvakuti padhuze nekurambana, anenge akuda kutsvaga supporting document rekuti mushiyane maproperties.
You want to respond to that? I think let me respond to that. So you get married today, and somehow you divorce maybe next week. It's not obvious that you are going to gain property. Remember, this marriage is out of community of property. So one of the things that you have to prove during divorce, you have to list the property that you acquired as a couple. Meaning, during that period, you have not acquired anything. You cannot properly lay claim to that property. But I think it's much more healthier to actually register a marriage. In practice, I've been telling my good friends, and they have no chat, and they have no register, advantage. It does protect you. So I don't think it's always the case, eh? But in any event, if you don't trust the person that you're about to marry, it doesn't hurt to have a prenup in place that gets to protect you in case a divorce visits you.
There is an issue that you raised where you said when cows came home, pauya one mombe. Munhu anogona kuenda here kunochata. Hatinge takukanganisa here chivanhu chedu, because we actually say kuti munhu anofanirwa kunokumbira wobhadharawo mari yekuti ubvumidzwe kuti uite muchato iwoyo.
All right. But let me respond to that. The majority of us, we are not even following chivanhu chacho. Because chivanhu hakuna zvekuchata zvesivhu izvi. Chivanhu it's yedu inotitenedza kuti vakadzi vakawanda. But what is coming out more is a hybrid. So mna apiwa list, anobva apiwa nelist remuchato. Anomaona kuti pane muchato, kumbira muchato. But that thing is unknown in customary law. So I think we need to elect. Do we really want to do chivanhu, or we want to do general? But trust me, our society, I think we're more of a hybrid society, where tunoda ma elements civil, patombochata pakazara vanhu and so forth. But we also want my pictures epa Instagram, cows came home. And usually when those cows came home, apparana one in That's why I'm sure the cows came home. Chamuya to one ipabeka, majava, chichi, but apana chenja mungwa. So chinozoitika usually is you find kuti mo Africa was ones but kwa na spouse yafa. And no pizza kurora and so forth. But again, the type of marriage that I'm married to, or married in terms of, younger is not provision for that.
Thank you very much for all those clarifications. We will give you back the opportunity to continue with the discussions as more questions come.
Thank you very much, Marsha, for steering that question and answer session. It is after 1 o'clock, 13:30 Central African time here in Harare, Zimbabwe. And if you've just joined us, thank you very much for coming through as we break down the Marriages Act, courtesy of the Old Mutual Women's Network. And I have with me Abigail, who is a director at the Zimbabwe Women Lawyers Association, as well as Authur Marara, as we try and understand what is Famba say. And if you are having your lunch, usazokachidzwa kana wanzwa zvinhu zvinoita work against your mjolo, toda kuti tinzwise kuti zviri kufamba sei. But maybe just as before we go into the key issues of marriage, Abigail, pane issue yema witness yambotaurwa. witness nekuti muchivanhu chedu vamwe tinotya kuroyiwa ka witness uyu especially kucustomary uku mutemo who is considered the right witness because ndogona kutya kuti tete vangu kana kuti hama yangu ikangozoti ndakunobvisirwa ichandiroya ndotora zvangu bhururu wangu anoita here bhururu pamawitness kana kuti panodiwa weukama.
Okay. If you look at the new law dealing with witnesses, it talks about a witness that is representing the family. So witness arikumirira muri kwa Muriro is the witness that you are coming with. And similarly, on the other end, your husband would have a witness that is representing his family. So they will ask, in terms of the questions that are put to the witnesses, munomuziva sei Linda, munomuziva sei Ningi. So you must be somebody that is able to have the status of representing the family. So you know where people have secret weddings and they just get someone off the street, those are not necessarily people that are considered as the primary witnesses within the customary marriages. They are known people that do this role. Even vanatete vangosha taura or vanasekuru, people that are already known to say uyu ndiye anomirira muri pachivanhu. And so customarily those are the kinds of witnesses that will be asked for.
Saka pasisina zvekutora witness wemurodzi kana uchitya kuroyiwa wotokwira gomo whether uri murume kana mukadzi wombotsanya kuitira kuti zveshuwa makauza aite kamu home nemadhavha acho. And then also just as we talking nyaya civil partnership iyoyo, this provision, does it not then undermine the institution of marriage or the law of adultery? Kana tiri kutaura kuti vanhu vanga vachichaya mapoto vanokwanisa vanozopatsanura properties or assets the same way as people in a marriage, what we're calling a marriage, do. Are we not then that provision undermining the law of marriage, the law of adultery, and the marriage institution as well?
I think that is a key challenge that we have noted when you look at the civil marriage and you juxtapose it with the civil partnership. The fact that the law is saying the two can coexist, the impact of that coexistence is neutralizing the monogamous nature of a civil marriage. Civil marriage, remember, we said it's the two individuals to the exclusion of everybody else. But when you go further down in the Act, you then hear a provision that says a civil partnership can coexist with this one that we have said excludes anybody else. Yep. I think that is certainly a challenge, even in regards to, how we regulate. But from a practical perspective, there are many cases like that, where people are actually in relationships with individuals that are married. An example of cases that we've come across are cases, for example, when we had a lot of people going to the diaspora. People go to the diaspora, vanorambana zvekungo separator, but they do not divorce. So their marriage certificate or their 511 is still obtaining. And then they both move on. The one in the UK moves on with somebody, the one Asara Kunok moves on with somebody. But when you come back legally, the parties that have the marriage certificate, the civil marriage, are the ones essentially that were being recognized in the past. Civil partnerships now has given the opportunity to say, yes, tichaziva kuti it is possible that there is a marriage that is existing, but you were perhaps in that relationship.
All right, now let's talk about the key issues around marriage, Abigail. Especially muchivanhu chedu tine maaspects akawanda ekuti dzinogona kungotizira kana ndatotizira ndokwanisa kutoti here taakutopinda muwanano. Nyaya dzekonzi zvine basa here because muchivanhu chedu ukangotizira kana ndatongosvika nechitoti ndasvika 5 months ngatototanga kutenga madhishi nemachichichi pamutemo zvakamira sei and all the other issues. Who can choose to marry? Who can I marry? Zvakamira sei?
Okay. So I think one of the key elements of marriage is that it must be given by someone freely and they must consent to be in that marriage. So issues of consent are critical. Saka zvekumanikidzana kupinda muwanano pasina chibvumirano, that is not allowed by law. So examples are when you come by force and say, because I'm here, or chimutsamapfiwa, those customary practices where it's forced marriage in essence, that is not allowed by law. Someone must be able to give their free and full consent. So at every interval, when you're going to interact with a marriage officer, the question of free and full consent is going to be asked of the individuals. Murukubvuma ere, makasununguka ere, kuti muve muwanano naningi, and then you answer to that.
Do you take this woman to be your lawfully consent?
Yes.
Thank you for making us understand. It's part of the,
Yes, so you must be able to give your free consent. I want to talk about issues around wife inheritance when we talk about consent, because the Marriage Act recognizes that there is a culture of otsika, yekuita wife inheritance, inheriting the wife of your deceased brother or deceased relative. And what is key in that is the element of force. If you force someone to say, because wafirwa murora, muno mumusha unotofanira kuti uwanikwe chete nema brothers ake, that is not allowed by law. But if the murora is giving her free and full consent, ndinoda kuti ndirorwe nababa mukuru kuti vana vangu varambe vari vedzinza rimwe chete, that is okay. So the key issue is that the consent must be given freely and not forced either by customary practice or by just, the way life goes to say, you've got to comply in this way. So free and full consent is a key element when we talk about marriages. The other issue that we find in the law is around the rights and obligations. The law says that we have equal rights and obligations during the subsistence of the marriage, nepatinorambana. So we have equal rights. Baba na mai in the marriage have equal rights to make decisions over their children, equal rights to make decisions pertaining to property. So for someone to go and take Chikwereti back door, and you are perhaps not aware, those things are no longer applicable because we are talking about equal rights. Equally, we have equal obligations. Equal obligations to love each other. We are in a marriage after all, and it's about love. To take care of each other, give companionship, take care of our kids, take care of our assets in the best way possible. So we've got equality of rights and obligations as a key element of the marriages. As we are staying together and even patinorambana. Saka zveshaisano zvekuti tarambana iwo chingoenda nemaoko. For women, a lot of the times, the issue was go with maoko property. Kakupa kitchen unit nemapoto. Ndoja unofana kuenda nazo. You should not get assets of value. That is not allowed by law. We must be able to share whatever we put our effort to acquiring during the subsistence of the marriage.
All right, so we have under 20 minutes to conclude our discussion. And I have with me Abigail, who is director at ZWLA, Zimbabwe Women Lawyers Association, as well as Authur Marara. And I think one of Maningai Trenda, and it is good that Old Mutual has given us this platform to have this discussion, was then that chemakaedza kunyora muchiexplain in brief what the Marriages Act entails. Ichakabva kuZWLA, and then a lot of people were then circulating that and trying to explain. But as ZWLA, what are some of the issues that have come through around issue of marriages that you think that this Marriages Act will address?
I think the Marriages Act addresses issues around child marriages that we spoke about, and that is a positive attribute. It also addresses issues around these unregistered customary law unions who were not given status before, and now there's this encouragement to say register. And the reason you are being encouraged to register is so that you enjoy the full protection of the law in regards to marriages. So those are positive attributes. Our experiences have always shown us that, people don't necessarily comply with the law. That is part of the challenge that we see. So some people can say, it does not relate to us. But the law is trying to get all of us to a point where we've got some form of registered marriage. And once we get that, we then get in the necessary rights that come with that registration status, which is a very different position that we have at the moment. If anything, the majority of the kinds of marriages we have in the country are actually unregistered customary law unions. And that's a cause of concern because the majority tiri ikoko, but we are not protected. So what is progressive and developmental about this law is to say, let us all register so that we can be protected. And we really hope that people will, go to their nearest courts, go to the marriage registry to be able to register so that they enjoy protection for their own benefit rather than anything else.
All right, and I will ask the same question to you, Authur, as a legal practitioner. What aspects or challenges that have been faced so far that you think the Marriages Act will address? Ndapi matambudziko angachinyanyo nevanhu vari muwanano that you think kuti Marriages Act ichagadzirisa, because then it's about solutions.
The Marriage Act will never resolve marital problems. It's the people that resolve their problems. But what I want to actually add, which is very important, is for all those who are in setups called civil partnerships. If your civil partner dies, you are not a surviving spouse. Are you hearing that? When your civil partner dies, you are not a surviving spouse. Spouse in the mother in general, civil marriage. So, basara executor kutsvaga property yemushakabvu. Izvozvo futi property husband yake yanga itori newewe. So, I think one of the things that we need to encourage is people need to be proactive, especially if you've got children, especially if you've got family. Let's be responsible. Let's practice something called estate planning. It's very, very important. You have a live will in place. Well, one thing that I'm really so grateful about the Act is it's also beginning to address the ugly realities on the ground. Because truth be told, people have lost respect for their own marriages. Now the law is saying, guys, you started this. It's not the lawmakers that say go and have a civil partner. We do that. Of course, some people elect not to get married, but obviously the consequences. So what I really think is the Act is coming in to really say, how can we do things better? But I also believe that we still need more work to be done in terms of developing and refining this piece of law. And I think we're discussing the issue on unregistered customary law. And for me, that still remains a cause for concern because many people are not going to go and register. So how do we do that? Are we going to leave that open-ended? Or as the lawmakers, they're going to be proactive and say, how can we come up with a solution that particularly deals with that?
All right, so I hope that, Marsha, we will be able to take a few more questions as we break this down.
Thank you very much for that. There's a question that came through. Maybe Abigail, you can then also help us and answer this one. Authur has been explaining to us that if you're in a civil partner, you are not a surviving spouse. You are not protected, and you are left bare when that umbrella goes. But the question that came through says, can she claim anything at all? Yes, she's not a surviving spouse, but can she be given audience during estate administration, and can she claim anything?
Okay, so in terms of the Marriages Act has given some protection for a civil partner when they're terminating their relationship, when they are alive or whilst they are alive. And it has not gone as far as dealing with the question around inheritance because there is separate legislation that deals with our inheritance laws. And so at the moment as things stand, the civil partner is got protection whilst they are alive, sharing their property that they acquired with their other partner, and not necessarily when we are at death. Because the laws that relate or govern issues around death have not incorporated the existence of this partnership. The laws that have incorporated this are in regards to the marriages and not the inheritance laws.
And the other question also that has come through is the 12 months extended, or after the lapse of the 12 months, that's it? I think that one is an easy one.
So the law says that you must register within 12 months if you're already in an unregistered customary law union, so that your union takes the status of a customary marriage. But in the event that you fail to register within 12 months, it does not necessarily mean that you no longer are married. Put differently, it does not mean that you don't exist. But you do not have the protection that you were going to get had you registered. So you remain with what they term limited recognition. So you're only recognized in very specific limited circumstances, inheritance for one being one of the examples. But if you register and become a customary marriage, then you enjoy the full range of protection like any other marriage.
Thank you very much for that. Now either one of you can take this one. The question says, already the 5.11 marriages had their issues. As an example, you are married before a marriage officer who does not then proceed and register that marriage with the registrar. And then you find out after the death of your spouse that, you know what, the ceremony you did never happened. Now that so many other officers are being given an opportunity to solemnize customary marriages, what steps have been put in place to ensure that indeed these marriages will stand the test of time? As an example, is there a certificate that will be issued that one can go about with and say, I am married?
Yes, so once you register, you will get a certificate. So as long as you are sitting in a marriage that is registered, you are going to get a certificate that you are able to use. Whenever you are asked to say, are you married, you are able to produce that certificate. But if you remain in anything that is not registered, then you will not have a certificate. So yes, you will be able to get a certificate that you then be the evidence you need to show that you are someone who is married.
Thank you very much. Authur, you spoke about prenuptial contracts.
Yes, miss.
And that was very exciting. And somebody's asking and saying, at what stage do we enter into a prenup? Is it before, after? Can I do it now, after 20 years of marriage?
So pre means before. So it means it's before marriage. Then you can actually do a post-nuptial, meaning the direction that we're in there, I think was love without your pass. So you can actually do it as well during the currency of your marriage. However, in Africa, in Zim, we're not yet that open-minded. The moment you sign up, but the truth is that life happens. That's the truth. So right now, what is document you sign up, I don't want to tell those program and so forth. But I actually think it's very important to sit down, get proper advice. I actually did an article called Love is Not Enough. It's not actually enough. I love you. That's not a good reason for marriage. So we need to get to have this conversation. I think it does actually help.
And you spoke about trust. And somebody got excited and interested. Maybe not trust as such, but you spoke to estate planning.
Yeah.
And somebody's asking and saying, elaborate a little bit further and tell me or tell us on this platform how a trust can protect women from civil partnerships.
All right, no, it doesn't necessarily. A trust, by definition, is simply an extension of your balance sheet, because it's just an arrangement. But I think what's more important is to sit down with your advisor, come up with something that really applies. Remember, during divorce proceedings, even the property that is in a trust can actually be interfered with. So I hear many people saying, no, if I put things there, trust, they're not safe. Because a trust is not a legal person. But even the property that is in a company, the Matrimonial Causes Act allows piercing of the corporate veil. So nothing is really safe.
Thank you very much, Marcia, for those questions and for those responses, Authur. And as we end our discussion, the key elements, the takeaways for vanhu vakateerera, just then summarizing everything that we've said. But before that, I think a key element that you mentioned, Abigail, was around the issue yekuti, because I think ipapo futi pane ka confusion where you said kuti hapana harmony pakati pema inheritance laws nemutemo mutsva uyu wauya saka iri kungoprotecta vari kuchaya mapoto but munhu wacho wauri kuchaya naye mapoto ari mupenyu kana atoshaya afa mainheritance laws akutorwisana neprotection yawanga uchizowana munhu ari mupenyu ndizvo kana ndanzwisisa
ndizvozvo. Essentially it means that there would be need for review of our inheritance laws if there is need to give protection to a civil partner, to say what happens if your civil partner dies. What we have so far is what happens when you end the civil partnership whilst alive. We don't have provision to say, kokanafa, do you be, what should you be? Because the provisions have already canvassed a surviving spouse as the major beneficiary of an estate. And the surviving spouse is a person that is in a recognized marriage. And if you are not in a recognized marriage, then you are getting, evidence and support from the family that you were perhaps married customarily in an unregistered customary law union and we know you. But the civil partnership is not canvassed at the moment.
Authur, your parting remarks.
Parting remarks. Ngazvichengetera marriage yake.
To do that.
Simple. Munhu ngazvichengetera marriage yake. If you don't do that, no one is going to do that for you. And most importantly, I think my advice goes back to men. We really need to learn to make responsible decisions. Because one way or the other, they will literally catch up. And most importantly, my parting words is, guys, let's give a round of applause to Old Mutual. So for me, I'm really, really excited to be part and parcel of a group that believes in nurturing conversations that change lives. And I really think what the network is doing is literally changing lives.
Awesome. And Abigail, summarize everything that we've said. What is it that we've said that is important that everybody should know as we end this discussion?
As we end, if you are in an unregistered union or you are thinking of getting into one, please go and register. Also, to know that we have a new marriage that has been recognized, qualified marriages according to your religious practices. Also, that we have equal rights and obligations within marriage. So we have, equal status, both men and women, within that marriage. And that is something that is key as we talk about marriages. We also are no longer supposed to marry under 18-year-olds, so no to child marriages. So that is also a key takeaway from the marriages. I think on a social note, one of the key things is that we must go back and read the law. Remember when we started, when I said, as long as you don't know the law, you're going to fail to make an informed decision. And you are not going to be able to come back to court and say, well, because you must make it a point to know the law. If you are married, intending to marry, or in any relationship that you are in, know the law so that as you are going through that relationship, you are making the decisions that are informed.
Thank you very much. That was Abigail Machai, who is a Zimbabwean Women Lawyers Association ZWLA director. And we were having this conversation with Authur Marara, a legal practitioner. Many thanks to all of you who joined us as we were having this discussion to break it down and understand what the Marriages Act entails. But many thanks to Old Mutual Women's Network for bringing this discussion and leading the conversation around breaking it down and what it means. I am Linda Muriro. Have a fantastic day.